Husband sneering. Still throwing yourself at men for attention, I see. Wife calmly. That man was the forensic accountant tracing your embezzlement. By the way she slides the papers across the table, you can tell. These are updated divorce papers. You now owe me 70% after hiding assets. Husband laughing nervously. You'll never prove. The door bursts open, police stride in. Wife smiling sweetly. Oops, your mistress flipped first. Funny, I hired her to seduce you. I never meant to find it. The statement was buried on page 17 of Reed's corporate credit card bill. A transaction at Tiffany's for $8,743 that occurred while he was supposedly closing deals in Chicago. I froze, my cup of tea suspended midway to my lips as reality shifted beneath me. Business expenses, he'd always say with that practiced smile whenever I asked about our finances. Nothing for you to worry about, Hope. But that's exactly what I'd been doing for 10 years. Not worrying, not questioning, not seeing. Our sprawling suburban home suddenly felt like a beautiful prison, the silence deafening as I spread the financial statements across our kitchen island. With Reed away for another 3 days, I had time. For once I had time to really look. The discrepancies weren't even particularly well hidden, as if he'd grown lazy with confidence. Transfers to accounts I'd never heard of. Regular withdrawals that matched no household expenses. A pattern of financial deception that had likely been happening right under my nose for years. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in. I remember touching my wedding ring, twisting it nervously as I had so many times before when Reed would sigh dramatically at my questions, making me feel small for asking. You never did understand business, Hope, he'd say, his voice dripping with that particular brand of condescension he reserved just for me. That's why I handle the money. Stick to your charity work. My charity work. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years raising funds for domestic violence victims while slowly becoming a different kind of victim myself. I opened my laptop and began taking photos of everything, my hands trembling but my mind suddenly, startlingly clear. The trembling wasn't from fear this time, it was adrenaline. Something inside me had finally cracked open. The gaslighting started so gradually I barely noticed. Early in our marriage, it was almost charming how Reed would tease me about my terrible memory, when I'd recall conversations differently than he did. That's not what happened, babe, he'd say with a laugh. But it's cute how you mix things up. 3 years in, I stopped trusting my own recollections entirely, conceding to his version of events to avoid the exhausting arguments that would follow if I didn't. If you say so, Reed, became my mantra, the path of least resistance. By year 5, the public humiliations had become routine. At his office Christmas party, I'd mentioned reading an article about market fluctuations. Reed had placed his hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard as he smiled at his colleagues. Don't mind Hope, he'd said, his voice light but his eyes cold. She thinks reading the Wall Street Journal headline once makes her Warren Buffett. Stick to your strengths, honey. You look beautiful tonight and that's what matters. Everyone had laughed politely. I'd smiled too, dying inside as I always did. Later that night, I spent an hour crying silently in our bathroom while Reed slept soundly, untroubled. The isolation happened next. My friends didn't understand our lifestyle. My sister was jealous of our success. My parents never approved of ambition. One by one, Reed found reasons to cut the connections to my support network until it was just him and his version of reality which I was expected to accept without question. The charity gala last month was where something finally broke inside me. I'd been speaking with Dr. James Cooper, a cardiologist who'd made a generous donation to the children's hospital wing our foundation was funding. We were discussing the impact of early intervention programs when Reed appeared at my side, champagne flute in hand and that familiar social smile plastered on his face. Still throwing yourself at men for attention, I see, he murmured against my ear, his breath hot and his voice carrying just enough for Dr. Cooper to shift uncomfortably. Dr. Cooper was just telling me about the new pediatric cardiology initiative, I'd explained, feeling the familiar flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I'm sure he was, Reed had replied with a wink toward the doctor. Hope loves to network. She's so passionate about causes. The way he said it made charitable work sound like a character flaw. That night, something crystallized within me. I watched Reed work the room, charming and confident, while I stood frozen in a corner, wondering how I'd become this shadow of myself. The woman who had graduated top of her class in business administration, who had once been headhunted by investment firms, who had dreams beyond being Reed Morgan's perfectly groomed wife. 2 days after the gala, I made my first appointment with Dr. Abrams. Finding a therapist Reed didn't know through his extensive network had been challenging, but I'd been careful. Very careful. What you're describing is a classic pattern of emotional abuse, Dr. Abrams had said during our third session, her gray eyes kind but unflinching. The isolation from support systems, the public humiliation, the gaslighting, these are control tactics, Hope. I'd flinched at the word abuse. It seemed too harsh, too dramatic for what I was experiencing. There were no bruises to photograph, no broken bones to set. But he's never hit me, I'd whispered. Emotional abuse leaves invisible wounds, she'd replied. But they're just as real and often take longer to heal. I'd cried then for the first time in front of another person in years. The relief of being believed, of having my reality validated, was overwhelming. What should I do? I'd asked, wiping my tears. Confront him. Dr. Abrams had considered this carefully. Confrontation with abusers rarely goes as planned, Hope. They're skilled at turning situations to their advantage. Before you make any decisions, I think you need more information, especially given these financial irregularities you've noticed. That conversation was still echoing in my mind as I sat at our kitchen island, staring at the evidence of Reed's financial deceptions. Something had shifted inside me, a seed of determination taking root where fear and doubt had lived for so long. I closed the financial statements and carefully returned them to Reed's home office, making sure everything was exactly as I'd found it. Then I opened a new document on my laptop and began to type, investigation plan. I wasn't going to confront Reed. Not yet. First, I would build a case, meticulously, strategically, leaving nothing to chance. The financial executive he'd belittled for years was awakening from a long slumber. I would follow the paper trail wherever it led, and I would reclaim my life, piece by carefully documented piece. For the first time in years, I felt something that had been foreign to me in my marriage. Power. And I intended to use it. Finding Bryce Cohen wasn't easy. I needed someone Reed couldn't trace back to me, someone outside his extensive network of financial professionals. My college roommate, Melissa, now worked for the FBI in their financial crimes division. We hadn't spoken in years, another casualty of Reed's systematic isolation, but her Facebook profile was still active. It's been too long, she said when we met for coffee at a small cafe 40 minutes from our neighborhood. I'd told Reed I was attending a foundation meeting. I always wondered what happened to us. I carefully sidestepped her implied question. I need someone who can trace financial irregularities, Mel. Someone discreet, thorough, and not connected to Boston's financial elite. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Is everything okay, Hope? It will be, I replied, surprised by my own certainty. 3 days later, I sat across from Bryce Cohen in his modest office in Cambridge. With his rumpled button-down shirt and direct gaze, he was nothing like the polished financial advisors in Reed's circle. Mrs. Morgan, he began. Please call me Hope. Hope then. Your friend Melissa speaks highly of you. He leaned forward. She mentioned potential financial misconduct. I should be clear. If there's criminal activity, there are reporting obligations I can't ignore. I slid a USB drive across his desk. These are copies of statements I've gathered. Nothing conclusive yet, but enough to raise questions. I need to know what I'm dealing with before I make any decisions. Bryce inserted the drive, and his expression remained neutral as he scanned the documents. You've done preliminary work already. I have a business degree gathering dust, I said with a small smile. And motivation. He nodded. This will take time. And it won't be cheap. I have resources he doesn't know about, I assured him. A trust from my grandmother that Reed never touched. It should be enough. Bryce's eyes met mine. You've thought this through. I'm just getting started. My education began that night. While Reed slept soundly beside me, I slipped out of bed to the guest bathroom, laptop balanced on my knees as I sat on the cold tile floor. I'd developed a system, 30 minutes of research, then clear the browser history, shut down and return to bed. Reed never noticed my absence. He'd stopped paying attention to my movements years ago, secure in his control. I devoured articles on financial forensics, learning about cash flow analysis, asset tracing and document examination. I created a dedicated email account accessed only through a VPN. I purchased a prepaid phone with cash. The woman who had once meekly accepted Reed's financial expertise was methodically arming herself with knowledge. 3 weeks after our initial meeting, Bryce called my secret phone during my regular grocery shopping trip. "We need to meet," he said without preamble. "I found something." The something turned out to be 3 offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, each containing transfers from Reed's primary business account disguised as consulting fees to non-existent companies. "He's been siphoning funds for at least 5 years, Bryce explained, pointing to a timeline he'd constructed. "Conservative estimate, approximately $4 million hidden from both the business and your marital assets." My hand trembled slightly as I touched the paper. "Can we trace where the money came from?" "That's where it gets interesting," Bryce said, a glint of professional excitement in his eyes. "Some appears to be legitimate business revenue that should have been reported as profit. But a portion comes from accounts I can't fully identify yet. The pattern suggests possible investor funds being redirected." "You mean embezzlement?" "I mean we need more evidence," he corrected carefully. "But yes, that's where this is pointing." I took a deep breath. "What's our next step?" "We need internal documents I can't access externally. Financial statements, investor agreements, board minutes. Anything that shows the legitimate path this money should have taken." I nodded, already formulating a plan. "I can get those." Creating my documentation system became an art form. I converted a weathered Kate Spade tote that Reed had always disdained into my mobile command center. False bottom installed, it held a slim camera, my secondary phone, and a notebook with a coded system of my own devising. When Reed hosted business associates for dinner, I played my role perfectly, the attentive wife refilling wine glasses, then tactfully disappearing when conversation turned to business matters. But instead of retiring upstairs, I'd slip into Reed's study, photographing documents he'd carelessly left accessible. I developed a ritual for these covert operations, 20 minutes maximum, focusing on specific documents Bryce had requested. I'd memorized the exact placement of everything in Reed's office, developed a sixth sense for which floorboards creaked. The rush of fear and power was intoxicating. The offshore accounts were just the beginning. Working with Bryce, we uncovered a complex web of financial deception, falsified profit reports to investors, manipulated tax filings and systematic hiding of marital assets. Reed hadn't just been controlling our marriage. He'd built his entire career on manipulation and fraud. "This goes beyond divorce proceedings," Bryce warned during one of our meetings. "We're looking at potential federal charges." I'd nodded, unexpectedly calm. "I need to speak with a lawyer." Catherine Wells's office projected exactly the kind of power I wanted in my corner. Understated elegance with steel underneath. At 62, she had a reputation as Boston's most formidable divorce attorney, known for her methodical dismantling of financial deceptions. "Most spouses come to me with suspicions and maybe a bank statement they found in the laundry," Catherine said, reviewing the precisely organized file I'd brought. "You've practically built the case already." "I had help," I acknowledged. She looked up, her keen eyes assessing me. "This level of financial misconduct changes everything. We're not just talking about an equitable division of assets. With evidence of intentionally hidden marital property and possible criminal activity, we could potentially secure a significantly larger settlement." "What percentage?" I asked, the business major in me emerging. "Typically, Massachusetts aims for equitable distribution, often around 50-50 in long-term marriages. But with this level of misconduct..." Her smile was sharp. "I've secured up to 70% for clients in similar situations. And that's before we consider potential punitive damages." I absorbed this information silently. "This is an extraordinary case, Mrs. Morgan," Catherine said, closing the file. "But I should warn you, men like your husband don't surrender quietly. He will fight back, possibly ruthlessly. Are you prepared for what comes next?" For a moment I saw flashes of the past decade. The subtle undermining, the controlled isolation, the calculated diminishment of my confidence. Then I remembered the steel I'd discovered within myself these past months. "Call me Hope," I said. "And yes, I'm more than ready." "We need concrete evidence of his intentions," Catherine explained during our second meeting. "Financial documents establish the pattern of fraud, but personal communications would strengthen our position immensely." "Reed is careful with his digital footprint," I replied. "He uses separate devices for his indiscretions." Catherine's perfectly arched eyebrow lifted slightly. "Have there been many?" "Enough," I said, surprised by my lack of emotion. The betrayals had lost their sting, replaced by a cold, analytical focus. What if? I hesitated, the idea forming as I spoke. What if someone could get close to him? Someone he'd trust with his secrets? Catherine leaned back in her chair. "You're suggesting a honey trap." "I'm suggesting we give Reed exactly what he's always wanted: validation of his own irresistibility." Finding Naomi Mitchell was Catherine's contribution. "My niece is in law school at Boston University. She knows a student there. Brilliant, struggling financially with theater experience. Completely outside Reed's social circles. Naomi had the kind of beauty Reed couldn't resist, confident yet seemingly obtainable." We met at a small coffee shop near the university, where I laid out my proposition. "Let me get this straight," she said, stirring her latte methodically. "You want me to pretend to be interested in your husband, record his conversations, and get him to reveal financial misconduct?" "Yes." "And you're not upset about the implications of this arrangement?" I smiled thinly. "Reed stopped being faithful about 3 months after our wedding. I'm well past jealousy." Naomi studied me with surprising intensity. "This could get complicated." "It already is. That's why I need someone smart enough to navigate the complications without getting lost in them." She was silent for a long moment. "Law school is expensive," she finally said. "And working part-time at the library barely covers ramen. I can offer $20,000, plus bonuses for actionable evidence. All expenses covered, of course." Her eyes widened slightly. "With that kind of money I could graduate without additional debt. Consider it an alternative legal internship. Just with better compensation than most." She laughed then, a genuine sound that surprised both of us. "When do we start?" The training sessions began the following week. In my hotel room. Never my house, never anywhere Reed might have connections. I created a detailed profile of my husband. "Reed responds to intellectual challenge followed by deference," I explained, pacing as Naomi took notes. "He likes to feel superior, but only after establishing that you're worthy of his time. Appeal to his expertise, but demonstrate enough knowledge to be interesting." "What about physical preferences?" Naomi asked pragmatically. I hesitated only briefly. "Conservative in public. Tailored dresses, nothing flashy. He dislikes obvious attempts at seduction. It makes conquest too easy. In private, he likes to feel in control." Naomi nodded, her expression professional. "And what specific information are we looking for?" "Details about investor meetings, access to his private office, any mention of offshore accounts or entities called Meridian Holdings, Apex Consultants, or Blue Horizon Limited." We spent hours crafting Naomi's character. Naomi Reynolds, recent MBA graduate with family money looking for investment opportunities. We studied photographs of Reed's office, practiced conversation scenarios, and established emergency protocols. "What if he doesn't take the bait?" Naomi asked during our third session. I smiled. Reed has never met a challenge he could resist. Especially one that strokes his ego. Creating Naomi's backstory required meticulous attention to detail. We established a digital footprint, carefully backdated social media profiles, a professional website showcasing her fictional investment portfolio, even business cards and letterhead for her family office. "Everything needs to withstand scrutiny," Bryce advised as he helped construct her financial background. "Reed will verify her story." We arranged for Naomi to accidentally meet Reed at his favorite lunch spot, an upscale bistro where he took potential clients. She would carry investment prospectuses, appear frustrated by a phone call, and create an opportunity for Reed to offer assistance. The morning of their planned encounter, I felt an unexpected wave of nausea. Not from jealousy, but from the strangeness of orchestrating this elaborate deception. For a moment, I wondered what had happened to the woman who once believed in direct communication and honesty. "Are you sure about this?" Naomi asked, seeming to sense my hesitation as we finalized details by phone. "Yes," I replied firmly, pushing doubts aside. Reed forfeited honesty years ago. Watching the plan unfold through Naomi's recordings was surreal. She wore a specialized recording device provided by a private investigator Catherine recommended. Expensive but undetectable. I couldn't help but notice those prospectuses. Reed's voice came through the speaker, that familiar tone of calculated charm sending chills down my spine. Alternative energy investments? That's an area of particular interest to me. Naomi played her role perfectly, competent yet deferential, intriguing without being obvious. By the end of their chance meeting, Reed had suggested a follow-up conversation about potential investment opportunities. "That was uncomfortable," Naomi admitted when we debriefed that evening. "He's very smooth." "Years of practice," I replied. Over the following weeks, Naomi gained Reed's confidence with remarkable efficiency. Their meetings moved from public restaurants to his private office. Their conversations from general investment discussions to specific opportunities with his firm. Each recording revealed more of Reed's calculated manipulation. The same techniques he'd used on me now deployed on Naomi. The familiar patterns were both validating and painful to witness. "He mentioned Meridian Holdings today," Naomi reported excitedly after their 5th meeting. "Said it was a special opportunity for select investors. When I expressed interest, he hinted that formal investment channels were unnecessarily restrictive." "That's it," I whispered. "That's the connection we needed." I hadn't anticipated the friendship that developed between Naomi and me. What began as strictly professional meetings evolved into conversations that stretched late into evenings. My ex-boyfriend was similar. Naomi confided one night over takeout containers in my hotel room. Not as sophisticated as Reed, but the same playbook: isolation, subtle criticism disguised as concern, making me question my own perception. "How did you get out?" I asked. "My roommate staged an intervention. Showed me text he'd sent her trying to hook up while we were together." She smiled grimly. "Sometimes you need external evidence to trust your own instincts." I nodded. "That's exactly what we're doing, gathering evidence. Not just for the court," Naomi said thoughtfully. "For you too. Validation that you weren't crazy all those years." Her insight startled me. This law student had seen through to the heart of my mission in a way I hadn't fully acknowledged to myself. As weeks passed and evidence accumulated, Naomi became more than an operative. She became my confidant, perhaps my first real friend in years. The irony wasn't lost on me, that in setting a trap for my manipulative husband, I'd found an authentic connection I'd been missing. "He's invited me to the charity gala next weekend," Naomi said during our latest update. "Said it's time I met his associates." I froze. "That's where I'll be. As his wife." We stared at each other, understanding the perfect climax this presented, and the perfect risk. "Then I guess it's time for the next phase," Naomi said with quiet determination. "Are you ready?" I took a deep breath. "More than you know." The charity gala loomed 3 days away, and with it the converging of my two carefully separated worlds. That morning I stood in our master bathroom, applying mascara with practiced precision while Reed showered. My reflection showed the same Hope Morgan I'd been for years, poised, attractive, unthreatening, while inside, an entirely different woman calculated her next move. "I'm having my tux pressed for Saturday," Reed called over the sound of running water. "Wear the blue Varawong. The donors respond well to it." "Of course," I replied, my voice pleasant and accommodating. The perfect wife right on cue. "I've already scheduled my hair appointment." "Good girl," he said absently. I watched my reflection carefully, making sure no flash of anger showed in my eyes at his condescending praise. The art of self-control had become second nature over our 10-year marriage, but these past months had elevated it to a masterclass in deception. When he left for work, I made my usual show of kissing him goodbye at the door, reminding him about dinner that evening with his board member Lawrence. The moment his car disappeared down our tree-lined street, I moved quickly to the guest bedroom closet. Behind winter coats and seldom-used luggage, I'd created a small hidden repository. Using a step stool, I reached past the air vent, a space Reed would never think to check, and retrieved a small lockbox. Inside were the items that mattered most. My grandmother's jewelry that Reed thought I'd put in the bank vault, original copies of my academic credentials, family photographs from before Reed had systematically removed them from our home, claiming they clashed with the decor. I added these to the growing collection in my safety deposit box at a bank across town. A bank where Reed had no connections. Item by item, I was extracting the evidence of my true self from our shared life. Financial independence had been my first priority. The trust from my grandmother had remained untouched throughout our marriage. Something Reed had dismissed as sentimental nonsense, not worth his financial expertise. Now it provided the foundation for my escape. Working with a financial advisor Catherine had recommended, a woman who specialized in helping clients leave controlling relationships. I had established new accounts, secured credit in my name alone, and begun the process of building my separate financial identity. "You're ahead of most clients," Diane had told me during our last meeting. "Most women in your situation don't have access to their own funds." Reed's focus was always on control, not protection, I explained. He wanted to manage our daily finances, but never bothered to investigate what I might have independently. "His arrogance is our advantage," she'd replied with a knowing smile. The first close call came in late March. I'd been photographing documents in Reed's home office when I heard the garage door opener. Hours before he was expected home. His meeting must have ended early. Heart pounding, I quickly replaced the files, closed his drawer and opened instead the household accounts I legitimately managed. When he entered his office 30 seconds later, he found me at his desk with a checkbook and calculator. "What are you doing in here?" His tone carried that edge of suspicion I'd learned to fear. "The landscaper needs payment for the spring planting," I explained, gesturing to the checkbook. I couldn't remember if we'd agreed on the boxwoods or the hydrangeas for the east garden. He frowned. "You could have called me." "I didn't want to interrupt your meeting," I said, standing to give him access to his desk. "How did it go with the investors?" "The diversion worked." Reed launched into a self-congratulatory account of his presentation, his momentary suspicion forgotten in the pleasure of recounting his own brilliance. Later that night I sat on the bathroom floor, shaking with delayed adrenaline. The close call had rattled me more than I wanted to admit, bringing back the familiar feeling of walking on eggshells that had characterized so much of our marriage. "Focus," I whispered to myself. "Just a little longer." Living two completely separate lives exacted a toll I hadn't fully anticipated. The constant vigilance, monitoring my expressions, moderating my tone, maintaining the fiction of normalcy, was exhausting in ways I couldn't have imagined. I developed rituals to keep myself centered. Each morning before Reed woke, I would stand in our backyard, feeling the grass beneath my bare feet, reminding myself that this deception was temporary, that I was working toward freedom. Dr. Abrams helped me manage the psychological strain during our weekly sessions, now conducted under the guise of volunteer committee meetings. "What you're doing is necessary," she reminded me during a particularly difficult week. "But it comes with costs. You're essentially operating as an undercover agent in your own life." "Sometimes I wonder if I'm becoming like him," I confessed. "Using manipulation, hiding the truth." "The difference is intent," she said firmly. "You're seeking justice and protection, not control and domination. Don't lose sight of that distinction." Still, there were moments of doubt. Nights when I lay beside the man I was methodically destroying, wondering if there had been another path. Mornings when the weight of secrets felt too heavy to bear. During those moments I would remember the years of subtle cruelty, the systematic dismantling of my confidence, the financial betrayals that went beyond our marriage to affect innocent investors. The clarity would return along with my resolve. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place unexpectedly. Reed had been unusually distracted at breakfast, checking his phone repeatedly, his usual smooth composure slightly frayed. "Everything all right?" I asked, pouring his coffee with practiced domestic care. "Fine," he snapped, then immediately modulated his tone. "Just a hiccup with the Meridian account." I nodded sympathetically while my internal alarms blared. Meridian, the same entity Naomi had been tracking through her conversations with Reed. That afternoon, while Reed was at his club playing racquetball, I made an unexpected visit to his office, bringing lunch to his secretary Linda. After years of being the perfect corporate wife, these small gestures were expected, even appreciated. "You're a lifesaver," Linda said, accepting the gourmet sandwich. "It's been chaos here today." "Oh, what happened?" I asked, my voice casual as I arranged napkins on her desk. "Some issue with overseas compliance," she said between bites. "Mr. Morgan has been on calls with the Cayman office all morning." I nodded sympathetically. Regulations can be so tedious. "Especially with the FBI nosing around that investment group in Miami," she added, lowering her voice. "The one Mr. Morgan consulted for last year." My heart nearly stopped, but my expression remained one of mild interest. How frustrating for him. That evening I called Bryce from my secure phone. "We need to look into FBI investigations of investment groups in Miami. Specifically any connected to Reed's consulting work last year." 2 days later, Bryce confirmed what I had suspected. The FBI was investigating a Miami-based investment group for potential money laundering, a group Reed had consulted for according to his tax records. The same group that had connections to one of the Cayman Island accounts we'd been tracking. "This goes beyond embezzlement or hiding marital assets," Bryce warned. "Money laundering carries serious federal penalties." I sat in my hotel room, absorbing this final revelation. Reed hadn't just been stealing from our marriage or even just his investors. He'd potentially been involved in laundering money for who knows what kind of operations. "What do we do now?" I asked Catherine during an emergency meeting that evening. Her expression was grave but determined. "Now we accelerate our timeline. The charity gala this weekend is no longer just a confrontation point. It's our best opportunity to end this before the criminal investigation potentially complicates our strategy." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. After months of calculated patience, the endgame was suddenly, startlingly clear. "I'll be ready," I promised. The plan came together with precise, almost surgical detail. Catherine, Bryce, Naomi, and I spent the entire day before the gala in Catherine's office, refining every element of the confrontation. "Timing is everything," Catherine emphasized, tapping her pen against the timeline we'd created. "The divorce papers need to be served at exactly the right moment. After Reed's shown his true colors to the witnesses but before he can regain control of the narrative." Bryce nodded, adjusting his glasses. "And we need to make sure the financial evidence is presented in a way that's clear even to the non-experts in the room." "What about the police?" I asked. "Are we certain they'll arrive at the right time?" "My contact at the Financial Crimes Unit confirmed they've been building their own case," Catherine reassured me. "They're more than happy to coordinate. Your evidence was the missing piece they needed." Naomi's role had been carefully calibrated. She would arrive after the initial confrontation, providing the final piece of evidence that would complete Reed's unraveling. As we finalized the details, I felt a strange sense of calm. After months of fear, deception, and careful planning, the end was finally in sight. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Naomi asked quietly as we left the meeting. "Once we start, there's no going back." I thought about the decade of my life spent under Reed's control, the systematic erosion of my confidence, the financial crimes that had victimized not just me but countless investors. "I've been ready for years," I replied. "I just didn't know it until now." The evening of reckoning arrived with picture-perfect clarity. Reed had arranged a pre-gala dinner with his most important business partners at Maison Laurent, Boston's most exclusive restaurant. The guest list included Lawrence and Patricia Whitfield, major investors in Reed's firm, Senator James Harrison, whose campaign Reed had generously supported, and Martin Chin, Reed's oldest friend and business partner. I wore the blue Vera Wang as instructed, my hair and makeup flawlessly appropriate for the corporate wife Reed had cultivated. In my clutch rested the sealed envelope Catherine had prepared, divorce papers calculating a 70% settlement based on the evidence of hidden assets and financial misconduct. Throughout the appetizer course, I played my role with practiced precision, smiling at the right moments, asking appropriate questions about the Whitfields' recent vacation to the Maldives. Reed barely acknowledged my presence except to order for me salmon, not the steak I would have preferred, a small control tactic he'd employed throughout our marriage. "Hope doesn't have the palate for rare meat," he explained to the table with his familiar indulgent smile. Too delicate. I smiled thinly, noting Patricia Whitfield's slight frown at his condescension. The conversation turned to business during the main course. Reed dominated as always, outlining his vision for expanding their investment portfolio into emerging markets. The regulatory environment overseas offers certain flexibilities, he explained, swirling his bourbon. My contacts in the Cayman Islands have been particularly helpful in maximizing our returns. Lawrence Whitfield nodded appreciatively. The quarterly statements have been impressive. Whatever you're doing, it's working. I took a small sip of water, watching Reed bask in the admiration. The familiar pattern, Reed positioning himself as the financial genius while dismissing anyone who might question his methods. Hope was just saying she'd love to understand more about the business side. I interjected smoothly, setting my trap. Weren't you, darling? Reed's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Hope's strengths lie elsewhere. The financial complexities would only bore her. Try me, I said quietly, my tone light but my eyes challenging. Reed laughed, turning to the table. My wife suddenly fancies herself an investment expert. Next thing, she'll want a seat on the board. The dismissive chuckle that followed was precisely what I'd been waiting for. The public diminishment that had been his pattern for years. Actually, I said, reaching for my clutch, I've developed quite an interest in financial forensics lately. Reed's expression froze slightly as I removed the envelope. What's this? He asked, his tone still light but with an undertone of wariness. Updated divorce papers, I replied calmly, sliding them across the table. You now owe me 70% after hiding assets. The silence that descended on the table was absolute. Reed's face cycled through expressions, confusion, disbelief, then the beginning of his practiced damage control smile. Hope's been under tremendous stress lately, he began, reaching to take the envelope before anyone could examine it. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. The stress of discovering my husband has been embezzling from his own company and clients? I interrupted, my voice steady. Or the stress of finding out about the money laundering connections in Miami? Lawrence Whitfield's fork clattered against his plate. Senator Harrison shifted uncomfortably. Martin Chen's expression hardened into something dangerous. You'll never prove any of this, Reed hissed, his facade cracking. You don't have the resources or the intelligence. But I do, came a familiar voice from behind him. Reed turned to find Naomi standing there. Not as the seductive potential investor he'd been cultivating, but as a clear-eyed witness in a professional suit, holding a recording device. Naomi Reynolds, she introduced herself to the table. Or actually Naomi Mitchell. Law student and state-licensed private investigator assistant. Reed's face drained of color. What is this? This, I said as the restaurant's main doors opened to admit three serious-looking individuals in dark suits, is justice. Reed Morgan, the lead agent said, approaching our table. I'm Special Agent Davis with the FBI. We have some questions about your connections to Meridian Holdings and certain financial transactions in Miami. The aftermath unfolded with stunning swiftness. Reed was taken for questioning while the dinner guests sat in shocked silence. Patricia Whitfield reached over to squeeze my hand briefly. A small gesture of female solidarity that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. How long have you known? Martin asked quietly as the others began gathering their belongings. Long enough to do something about it, I replied. The evidence has been turned over to the authorities. You might want to contact your lawyer. He nodded grimly. For what it's worth, I didn't know about Miami. But you knew about the rest, I stated rather than asked. His silence was answer enough. 3 months later, I sat on the patio of my new apartment overlooking the Charles River. The legal proceedings were still ongoing, but the immediate outcomes had exceeded even Catherine's expectations. Reed had been denied bail due to flight risk after investigators discovered packed bags and a private plane on standby. The evidence I'd gathered had led to multiple federal charges, with former associates like Martin turning state's evidence to save themselves. My phone buzzed with a text from Naomi. Pass the bar exam. Celebration dinner tonight. I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. Our unlikely friendship had deepened in the aftermath, with Naomi accepting a position at Catherine's firm after graduation. Dr. Abrams had warned me that justice wouldn't automatically bring healing. The legal victory is just the beginning, she'd cautioned. The emotional recovery takes longer. He was right. There were still nights I woke up in a cold sweat, momentarily trapped in the psychological prison Reed had constructed. Days when I second-guessed my own decisions, hearing his voice in my head questioning my competence. But those moments were becoming less frequent. The woman who had meticulously constructed Reed's downfall was discovering she could build something else just as carefully, a new life defined by her own choices. I took a sip of tea, watching the sunset reflect off the river. The financial settlement would ensure I never had to worry about money again. More importantly, the frozen accounts Reed had hidden offshore were being used to compensate the investors he'd defrauded. Justice, it turned out, could indeed be served cold. But the life that followed could still be warm with possibility.